The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the participants and do not reflect the view of any institution any participant is associated with. We'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society, and today Scott and I will conclude our conversation about foreign policy. We're going to be talking about the proxy wars that are being fought in the Middle East and give our assessment of what might be the United States' strategy in dealing with the proxy wars in that region. We're also going to talk a little bit about the United States elections in 2024. Not only will the elections have an impact on world politics from the standpoint of how the United States is going to deal with the rest of the world, but at the same time, it will have an impact on how the rest of the world views and deals with the United States. So let's listen in. My question is it going to be against the proxies, or is it going to be against Iran directly? Are they going to take it all out on Hezbollah, take it all out on the Houthis, take it all out on Hamas, or are they truly going to go and figure out a way to impact Iran?
Right. And look, I'm not a chess player, but I've played it enough to know that pawns are the ones who usually get eliminated first. and so that particular case, yes, Iran is using the Houthis and the Hamas and Hezbollah as pawns, and those are going to be the ones who pay the price. We should mention, by the way, just parenthetically, I suppose, that Israel never confirms or denies that they had anything to do with any of those attacks, which is one of the reasons why I think that they've been so successful at them. Look, I mean, time will tell what the response is. I think we're going to see it over the next few days, if not today. By the time this goes out, it'll probably have already happened. But I do think that it will be a longer term. Now we're kind of like, okay, it's disrupting shipping. One of our choices is to destroy oil platforms. Are we going to do that and see the price of oil go up? The consequences of every action need to be taken into consideration. Well-known drone sites, perhaps, bases that are not in Iran itself, but are in Syria, Iraq, possibly Lebanon. Those are targets. And that's what they will be looking at. There will be nothing, I think, in Iran itself. And the other part of this, of course, is the bigger picture, which is that, as I said before, what scares Iran or motivates Iran is a partnership between Israel and the Saudi Arabians and the Sunni Muslim world that comes along with Saudi Arabia, and that these partnerships between these countries that have been antagonists are based more on pragmatics than they are on ideals, and that cold peaces are still peace, and that there will be the continuation of those talks to build on common ground when it comes to commerce in the Middle East and into Europe should go forward, and hopefully will go forward. And that one consequence of that will be a Palestinian state or a move toward Palestinian statehood. And I know that the current administration in Israel does not support that, but I don't think it matters, because I don't think that they're going to be around that long in power. As soon as the Israelis feel like they're on safer ground, they'll never feel safe again, I don't think, but safer, then they will move to remove Netanyahu and his cabinet from power, because they have failed so uniquely here and do not deserve to maintain power in Israel. So I don't think that whatever Netanyahu is saying is in the long term even significant, because I don't think he's going to be there for very much longer. I will be surprised if I'm wrong about that. I definitely will be surprised, but I don't see an argument for him being able to stay there other than this is an ongoing situation you don't change right now. And that can't last forever.
We hope it can't last forever.
I mean, they've been on war footing, since 1947. So yes, it has lasted that long in Israel. And my brother and I were talking about this, and he's a year older than I am, so he has a better memory of 1974 than I do. Is it 74, 73? 73 than I do. And he remembers my father kind of shaking his head watching the TV during the Yom Kippur War and saying, "I don't think that they're going to make it through this one." And
Really?
and yeah, and like, my father was a pretty intelligent, sober kind of guy, so he's not a hothead by any chance, and not a pessimist either. And he just felt that the time had run out for Israel, and Israel, obviously rallied back and managed to get through that one, and has, gone on to become the military power in the Middle East since then.
And it's important for us to remember that and again, I'm your brother's age, maybe a little older, maybe a year older than him. I remember it, and it was closer than people think. A lot of people, when they talk about it, history is written by the victors. American history has always been very supportive of Israel, writes it as if, yeah, they were the underdog. However, it went pretty much their way the whole time. And the fact is, it did not. The Yom Kippur War was a lot closer than people think it was. And it could have gone either way for quite a period of time. And I could see where your father probably sat back and said, maybe they're not going to make it through this. There's definitely a correlation to that. So you wanted to talk a little bit about North Korea.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. It isn't in the papers very much, right? But I did read the other day that earlier this month in January, two experts on North Korea, and this is Robert Carlin, who's a former State Department Bureau of Intelligence and Research, and Siegfried Hecker, who's the former director of Los Alamos National Laboratory, warned that Kim has made a strategic decision to go to war, and that the danger is already far beyond what the routine warnings that we're all used to getting from North Korea, right? Provocations, meant to get attention and so forth, and that we have to take him seriously because the war preparation themes that you're seeing in North Korea's media are not typical. They're worse than they have been. And that it's certainly possible that because we are perhaps an overstretched superpower, right, focusing on the Middle East, focusing on Ukraine, and focusing somewhat on China and Taiwan, right, that that North Korea has decided that this is as good a time as any to try to make some moves, whatever the goal is that he has, which is never clear, at least to me. I've never understood what he wants other than like one Korea, which is
Right.
not likely to ever happen, or that, or that one way or another they're going to end that war, which never really ended. And that all the moves that he's taking, he's is kind of odd in a way, but he got something out of Ukraine that he's never had before, which is an opportunity to battle test his weapons, because he's providing so many missiles and so much weaponry to the Russians in their war in Ukraine, that he actually gets to see what they're good at and what they're not good at in real action. And that's something that they've never had before. They've test shot missiles into the sea and so on and so forth. But now they're really working on provocations that they probably feel will have fewer consequences, because we're not ready to go after North Korea. So I guess my question back to you is, what do you do about a problem like North Korea? And try to keep in mind that when Trump was president, he made this personal, as I said before. He made this like, we fell in love, but that the talks that they had in Hanoi in 2019 when he was president didn't accomplish anything. They ended that meeting, that summit, whatever it was called, in Hanoi early, sent the North Koreans back to North Korea with nothing, nothing on either side. We got nothing out of it. They got nothing out of it. And that was really the end of it as far as the Trump administration is concerned. They never really picked up on it again. And so what does Biden do to address the provocations that we're getting from North Korea?
I did read John Bolton's book, and now how much of it is factual and not just his opinion and self-aggrandizing himself, I can't say. But just in his conversations when he was at the Hanoi conference, there was a lot of pushback, not from Trump, but from the people that were there with him. The Secretary of Defense is the National Security Advisor, and they kind of tempered the whole thing. And I think that again, going to Bolton's book, I think it was what it was called, it was that tempering by the advisors that the North Koreans picked up on and figured, okay, this is a losing cause. We're not going to get anywhere. Here's the issue that I've got, and you made a very good point. We are a superpower, but we're a very stretched superpower. We're also a very reluctant superpower. We like the title. We're like the heavyweight champion of the world. We like the title. We're not so big on defending it. We're not going to be out there defending it every single week. We just like to be called it, and it makes us feel. It makes us feel good.
And we want those tomato cans of the week.
That's exactly right. So, I think a lot of what right now, I think the Biden administration's hope with North Korea is that the Chinese, who, believe it or not, have always been rather reasonable at curtailing the North Koreans from doing something totally stupid. I mean, they've been pretty good partners in that, and I think they understand the ramifications of them not controlling their little vassal state. So I really think that they understand that. But you also bring up Taiwan, and we've got this going on in the Middle East, and now we've had what's going on in Europe, in Eastern Europe. We are probably overstretched. Could we deal with it? Yes. But the American people, after Afghanistan, are not prepared to get into a long, drawn-out slog. I don't think that we have the stomach nor the desire to say, you know what, we spend almost $1 trillion a year on defense, on weaponry, and all this stuff. Let's just fix it all right now, use it, and start from scratch. I don't think anyone has that desire. So I think we're going to have to pick and choose, Scott. I think we're going to have to say, if Taiwan falls, yeah, it's not good, but we've got to pick our battles unless we have the willingness to say, okay, we're all in. We're all in. We are going to be the world's policeman, and woe the person that stands in our way. I don't know if we have that kind of fortitude any longer.
Right, which will bring me to Mexico next. But all right, let's.
We're not going to bomb Mexico, and then we're going to talk about those darn Canadians.
But just just to build on what you just said, China has been a reasonable partner when it comes to this conflict. China in the fire and fury part of the Trump North Korea dance, China had a brilliant response. They said, if North Korea attacks South Korea or somewhere in the United States, launches a missile at Seattle or wherever they were thinking about doing, that China would step aside and allow the United States to reduce North Korea to rubble. But if the United States or South Korea were the aggressors, they're now at war with North Korea and China. And nobody would be dumb enough to risk that. And that de-escalated the situation and led to the love letters and all that kind of nonsense that went back and forth between Trump and North Korea. So China had been a good third party referee, I don't know what you want to call them, but they're not necessarily going to always do that. In fact, right now, the sort of U.S.-China competition, the Russia invasion of Ukraine, our support of Ukraine, has left us kind of more isolated, right? Russia and China refuse to work with us. They have refused to enforce sanctions that the United States has put on North Korea. So Pyongyang's provocative actions, whatever they might be, lobbing missiles here or there or whatever, probably have fewer consequences than ever before because they've got these two powers that they've always relied on, that we've always relied on to keep the peace, not necessarily willing to be involved in it anymore, right? So the thing that I think I think Biden has done two things that are really quite smart. And one of them is the bringing together of South Korea and Japan, right? Which had never happened before in like 70 years, right? Or 80 years. President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida going to Camp David was momentous, right? You can't downplay that. I mean, they had been locking horns since World War II, not even
and
our
even
part of
before
World
that,
War.
let's
Before
face
that,
it.
right?
Yeah, the history of Korea and China and Japan is like never been
Right.
good.
Yeah, just brutal, right? And in fact, I think 60% of the South Korean public, opposed that decision by President Yoon, who, ran on this sort of like I'm a hardliner, and then turned around and made like normalization with Tokyo his main priority. So that's one thing, and of course, we both know that you create alliances as a means of deterrence, and the more allies that you have on your side, the better deterrent power you have. China doesn't really have, other than North Korea and to an extent Russia, which is of dubious value. They don't really have allies. And so we're doing well there. The second part of it has to do with Taiwan in a big way, which is that with the CHIPS Act and with our emphasis on bringing manufacturing back here in the States, we are no longer willing to outsource important microelectronics and chip making and stuff like that you absolutely have to have to the Pacific Rim. We're bringing it back here. And so I think that those two steps, right, creating more alliances, AUKUS, and the bringing together normalization of Japan and South Korea, and trying to reestablish ourselves as a manufacturing and more specifically chip making manufacturing hub here in the United States is akin to becoming the arsenal of democracy in World War II, or switching the peacetime manufacturing of cars and things like that to a wartime manufacturing of bombs and tanks and stuff like that. And any World War II historian will tell you that we just simply overwhelmed the enemy with the amount of material that we could throw at them. And that was really what the big difference maker was in World War II, and that is the big difference maker now. So we're having problems finding skilled workers here. We're having, but we are building the factories. We are, as Biden said, winning the future by taking at least the first steps to deny China the technology that they need to defeat us, and by doing public-private partnerships, spending a great deal of government money here, bringing manufacturing back, and especially semiconductors and all that kind of stuff. U.S. semiconductor manufacturing went from like nearly 40% of the global supply in 1990 to like 10% in 2022. And Biden is trying to reverse that. Those are smart moves.
In the world stage today, ye with the most allies wins. That's
right.
That's kind of like the way it goes.
It's right. It's such a force multiplier, and it should give anybody pause to take on economic powerhouses like the United States, Japan, and South Korea.
Yes, we have the Japanese. There's also the Australians. But then the question is, how invested? Push comes to shove. But if it came down to a shooting match, how many of them have the stomach to truly become involved when it's your people? And I think that, Europe, that's a huge question mark. I mean, it's a huge question mark for the United States as well. How willing are we to become truly involved, truly invested, not as a proxy, but when it comes to boots on the ground and people being put into danger? What is our fortitude into that? And to be honest with you, Scott, I question that.
Well,
I
everybody
truly
always
question
does,
that.
right? I
Huh?
mean, look, if anybody understands the implications of allowing this to get out of control, it would be Japan and Europe, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely,
Australia, absolutely right.
absolutely.
There's like, oh, well, we've been here before and it didn't work out that well the last time, and we better do something about it this time because if you continue to let them get stronger and stronger, you're not doing yourself any favors in the long run.
There are going to be actors out there, and we know this because we've seen it in history, where there's going to be actors out there that are going to take advantage of how thin this is. They're going to take advantage of their estimation on the willingness of the rest of the world to actually become truly involved, as opposed to proxy involved.
Right, which brings me back to what we started with. Great catastrophes seem unthinkable until they happen.
Right.
10/7 happened, and now South Korea is sitting there going, what if Kim decided to do that? And they're taking the steps that they need to take to prevent that from happening. But it would have been unthinkable for 10/7 to happen, just the way it was unthinkable for 9/11 to happen and for Pearl Harbor to happen. And that's unfortunately the world that we live in. It's full of these shocks. The best you can do is prepare for the war that's coming as best you can, right? Which is going to be microelectronics and chips and AI and a lot of things like that, rather than tanks squaring off against each other across an open field. And that's the best that we can do right now. You mass your allies together, you strengthen your ties, you keep it together, you continue to establish channels of communication with your enemies as well as your friends, which again, the Biden administration, I think, has gone like way down to the point where they weren't talking to China at all, weren't talking to North Korea at all. I think Biden tried to restart real conversations with North Korea some like 20 times and has been rebuffed, but he continues to do it. And at the same time, we're sending submarines, sharing intelligence, sharing missile defense. We're doing all the hardware stuff that you need to do to deter things from happening and to make sure that everybody is on the same page, that we're going to avoid having an accidental conflict happen, right? Which is,
Right.
right, World War I all over again, where we didn't really mean to let it get this out of control. It just kind of got away from us, and we don't want that to happen. So, you send signals of strength, you send signals of resoluteness, you send signals of like, we're willing to talk if you are. And I think that's the best you can do. And then you prepare to deny your enemies the infrastructure, the hardware that they need as best you can, and you build up those capacities yourself, right? You can't change the footing of a factory from peace to war if no factory exists. So right now, bringing manufacturing back to America and making sure that you've got good alliances around the world is really important.
Yeah. And let's face it, no matter what anybody says about Biden as the president today, right now he's the right guy in
Absolutely.
place. He is
His
the right guy in place.
his experience and knowledge of all these things really surpasses, I think, anybody that I can think of. I mean, I'm a huge Barack Obama fan, but Biden has blown away Barack Obama in terms of his strategic outlook and his ability to move the ball forward on any number of different things. Which I don't want to spend a lot of time. I think we're running out of time. But I mean we're on the verge of seeing meaningful legislation for immigration for the first time. Whether the House Republicans allow it to become law or not is going to be an interesting next couple of weeks. But the more I see people say, yeah, we got to go back to remain in Mexico, the more I think about another sort of unreasonable but rational actor who is Obrador, AMLO. Which when somebody says to me, well, the remain in Mexico policy, that worked really well. Did it? Did
No.
it? I mean, remain in Mexico kind of depends on Mexico's willingness to go along with it. And that's not coming cheap. And so how much leverage are you willing to give this guy who is not uh, a very nice man, as far as I can tell? And how much leverage are you willing to give somebody like that for to handle this issue, which Mexico has never really been all that cooperative except in fits. And you're already depending on him to return people to countries that we don't even talk to, like Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, I think. Like these simple solutions, build the wall and
Yeah.
remain in Mexico. They always seem to have three words, usually three syllables because they're that simple. Never real solutions to a problem.
2024, an election year in the United States for the presidency. Who we get, I think, will shape world politics for the next 4 years as would be expected. Do you think that if it appears that Biden is going to be reelected, do you think that some of these bad actors may act more quickly to damage Biden's chances just to get him out, to get Trump back? Or do you think that these bad actors are just going to hold off and hope Trump gets in, and in their thoughts, they have a more pliable person to work with?
So I think that they'll do everything in their power to get Trump back in, which includes deep fake videos and propaganda campaigns and social media and all kinds of stuff. It could be provocations, whatever it takes. They'll do that. I mean, China has a lot at stake here. Iran obviously has a lot at stake. Russia has a lot at stake. The world would love to see a weak America, and nobody weakened America more than Trump did. And I know that people hate hearing that and try to deny it and like to say, well, Trump kept us at peace, and I always bring up the example of Neville Chamberlain. If Neville Chamberlain was your idea of a good prime minister of Great Britain, then Trump should be your man, because the two of them are almost walking lockstep together in their philosophies. And by the way, Chamberlain probably would have lost anyway had he opposed them, but there's no reason for us to ever be as weak as we were during the Trump years. But they want that, and they're going to do what they have to do to get that if they can.
Does that include escalation, you think, in as far as these areas?
I think could we call it brinksmanship? Because I think that's what it will be. It's they'll go as far as they can push it without pushing it too far. The same as we're going to do in Iran. We're going to push it as far as we can go without going too far. And it takes a lot of experience to know where that line is. And you certainly look. I mean, one of the things I think Trump did really poorly, and I think most things he did poorly. One of the things that he really did poorly was he reversed the old Teddy Roosevelt saying. He talked loudly and he carried a very small stick. And there's no, that's such a losing way of conducting yourself on the global stage. I mean, he got laughed at the UN. He humiliated himself in Helsinki. He humiliated the country by dealing with Kim the way he did. And I think that they'll do the same thing that we would do, that they'll bring it right up to the brink wherever they think that line is, and that they'll invite us to respond however we want to respond. We've seen this before. We saw it in Vietnam, where LBJ had a peace deal on the table with both North and South Vietnam, and because Richard Nixon wanted to become president, he got Madame Chennault to work on the South Vietnamese to reject that deal with the promise that Nixon would get them a better terms and a better deal. And the Vietnam War continued for another 5 years after that. We've seen it in Iran with the hostage situation, which we now know Reagan dealt with the Iranians through proxies who have come forward since then, recently, to say that, you keep the hostages as long as you can. And all the Iranians really cared about is that they hated Jimmy Carter. They didn't know probably who Ronald Reagan was, but they hated Jimmy Carter because Jimmy Carter supported the Shah. Right. and brought the Shah back to the United States, and rather than having him face justice there. And that and so, everybody does, realism dictates that you do what you have to do to advance your cause and defeat your enemies, right?
Right.
And you act rationally, but you can push that to an extent. And right. And that's what I think we're going to see.
They may test us. This may be a test of the United States, our resolve, and exactly, like they tested with Russia. Are we as powerful as we say we are? We as powerful as we are on paper?
Right, and we know that Russia isn't. But I'm right. going to respectfully disagree with you on that front, because I think that if a Republican regime did return, it would be under Trump, and that his attitude towards Iran would be, hey, you be you. We're not getting involved, and there would be no troops over there, and we would abandon, any pretense that we have interests in the Middle East other than Israel, which would be tantamount to saying to Israel, you know what, it might be time to pack your bags and leave, because we're not here to help you anymore. And I really do think that Trump would do that if he felt that it was in his best interest to do it.
See, I was kind of hoping that I was going to go with the better case scenario, that Trump wasn't the regime that got in, but maybe it was Haley. And
dream on.
Yes, I know.
I don't think you're going to say, you want a hot take, Carol? She's not going to last like another 3 weeks.
She's good. No, I think she's in through Super Tuesday.
Oh,
she got the money.
Was that the first week in March?
Yeah.
Another month or so.
Another month or so.
I mean, Scott? I think right now she's hanging around for the Supreme Court to go, you know what, Trump's disqualified, and she's the only one there.
That's always been my comment. And I think that because, again, when you think about it, if they say you're disqualified, and you've already passed Super Tuesday, all those primaries have already been decided. Now what do you do? All your primary votes, all your delegates that went to a guy that is not going to be able to be the president. Now what happens? So yeah, I think you're right. She's hanging around just to see what
hanging around for them.
There.
And look, I don't know if you saw the letter that the historian sent the Supreme Court. It's not a letter; it's an amicus brief, basically explaining to the Supreme Court that this was the reason that these guys did this, was because it definitely includes the President of the United States, and they pointed to a negotiation that was happening at the time. And a senator, U.S. senator, got up and said, "Why aren't we including the president in this?" And they said, "Oh, we are, because the commander in chief is the main focus here." And he said, "Oh, I didn't get that. Okay, you're right," and sat down. and nobody ever brought up the naming the president again in the weird way that these people craft their legislation. But yeah, there's no doubt that. I don't think there's any doubt that it was an insurrection. That might be the loophole that they grab onto, but I don't see how you do it. And two, that it somehow affects the president. And then three, that it's up to Congress to decide that. They made very clear that no, Congress can reverse it, but they have nothing to do with enforcing it. Right. That 2/3 of Congress is needed to override the Constitution, as it were, and that without that, absent that 2/3 majority in Congress, the Constitution is clear that he's disqualified.
The fact that the United States is so divided politically internally also plays a big factor on all of these foreign policies and everything else that's going on in the world. Whether we like it or not, we are a major factor in world politics, and we are so divided today. So it is what it is.
Yeah, well, I guess the first test will be Mexico and the immigration policy, right? We should know this week. Later this week.
Can we test Canada first? Just because. I mean, it just sounds like an easy thing. Let's I don't know. Let's have a dispute with Canada and because everybody will be nice and friendly and it'll be fine. Yeah. I agree with you. Well, Scott, as always, great talking to you. You got your policy. You got your policy international.
I hope that explains everything to everybody.
Well,
clear as mud, I'm sure.
Absolutely. What is American policy? Heck, we don't know. It all depends on what's going on. We shift things as they come. All right, man. You take care.
All right. Be well. Thank you.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this episode. BH Conflict Resolution Services, a full-service dispute resolution firm offering expert and cost-effective mediation services to couples, groups, and businesses. BHCRS can be reached at www.bhcrs.com. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms. We'd like to thank all of our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.